Hello and welcome to another video. This is the one where you get to decide the future of my game development journey by taking part in a poll for which game that I should fully develop. Please excuse the mess. I am in the midst of getting rid of a bunch of stuff, and also I'm going out of town tomorrow for a week, so it's messy. I'm kind of under the gun here for getting this video out, so I haven't prepared a ton of stuff yet. I'm planning on doing a lot more research for this video as I'm traveling, so I'm filming this intro a bit preemptively, but there you go. So one question that I'm trying to constantly ask myself is, how do I develop games responsibly? Because I see a lot of people that quit their full-time job and they try and work on their dream game for 5 years and then they launch it and it flops, and that kind of seems like a semi-typical story. I don't want to be that guy. I want to mitigate risk as much as I can, and so how can I develop indie games responsibly? Part of that is me choosing to develop low-scoped games, so smaller games that I can ship out the door every few months. But part of that also is choosing a genre of game to develop that is most viable. And so the question that I'm asking myself is, which genre of game is most viable on Steam? And when I say viable, I mean which kind of game is best for me to spend my time developing and it will return the most amount of revenue for my time, on average. So I decided to do some market research. Which type of game genres are performing well on Steam and which ones are saturated and not performing very well. And we'll get to the data in a second, but as I was looking into this, I realized that market research is more about just the data. Like, I can look at the numbers, but learning how to interpret those numbers and making sure that you're looking at the right numbers is really, really important. So at a top level, I wanted to decide which questions I wanted answered, because I believe that there is an intelligent way to pick a genre. So as I was thinking through which questions I wanted answered as I was doing some market research for these prototypes that I've developed, I realized that the questions that I wanted answered were things like, how saturated is the market in this particular type of game genre? What's the average revenue for a game like this? Also, what's the median revenue? And what's the difference between average and median anyway? Let me tell you. So when you're talking about analytics like this and the average versus the median, you have to understand that if you have a bunch of games and you're trying to figure out what the middle revenue is, you can either take all of the revenue that all of the games have generated and then divide it by how many games there are, and that would be the average, or you can take the number of games and then pick the game in the middle, and that would be the median. So the difference between average and median is that if you have a game at the top end, how do you guys see this? You'd be over here. Okay, so if you have a game at the top end of the chart and it makes $100 bajillion, that's going to bring up the average tremendously. But if you have one big outlier like that, the median will still be the same, if that makes sense. A lot of you guys probably already know that, but I know some of you don't. So there we go. So I wanted to know what's the average in this genre and what's the median revenue in this genre. Another thing that I wanted to know is not just the total saturation, but how frequently are games in this genre being released? So how many new games are hitting the market? And then lastly, I just wanted to do a bit of competitive analysis to see which games are similar to the games that I envision myself making, and how do I stack up compared to those games, and how much revenue are those games making, all of that good stuff. So, luckily my friends over at VG Insights hooked me up with a subscription to their indie tier for their platform, and I was able to jump onto the VG Insights dashboard and look at a bunch of Steam analytics, which is really cool. I think they're going to be adding console platform analytics too in the future, so that'll be pretty cool, but I'll just jump in and show you guys because it's really neat. So I want to take a look at the viability of each of my prototypes from a data-driven analytical perspective. Now, I'm not a data analyst, so I don't know if I'm doing everything correct, but I'm just trying to follow my curiosity and kind of pick up tidbits of wisdom and learn as much as I can. And after doing a little bit of research into this, I realized that I think there are some flaws in my approach for how I'm looking at the market data, but we'll get into that in a bit. Okay, first up, let's look at my naval combat chess ship deck builder game. So when doing competitive analysis for this game, I was looking at games that were tagged with turn-based and deck builder, and those were the two primary tags that I based all of this data around. Initially, I was just looking at deck building games, so any game that was tagged with deck builder, and that was a big mistake. Because as I started looking at the data and I started looking at the specific games, I realized, I realized that I didn't recognize any of these games. Even if they were popular, I didn't recognize any of them, which right off the bat should tell you that I probably shouldn't be building this kind of game because I'm not even familiar with the market. And the next thing was that it was very obvious to me that all of the games in this genre were basically copying Slay the Spire. Empire. It almost looked like the same game with different art and slightly different mechanics over and over again. There were a lot of clones on there, or I just didn't realize how cookie cutter the deck builder genre was. So as I was thinking about my own prototype, I realized that the deck building mechanic wasn't the core mechanic actually, and that the game that I was trying to make is more about movement anticipation. And through this process, I've realized that it's a lot easier to tag your games correctly after looking at similarly tagged games, if that makes any sense. So I didn't need to just look at deck building games, I needed to look at turn-based deck building games. Okay, so let's answer my questions. So I'm going to turn my attention over here. So when I'm trying to figure out how saturated this genre is, I wanted to look at the total number of released games ever on Steam. So the total number of turn-based deck builder games on Steam is 357. And then when I looked at that number of games that was released in the past 12 months, that was 59 games in the past 12 months. So that's about 3 to 5 games every month that are getting released. But then I started looking at the average revenue and I realized that these numbers are really, really high. So if I look at the total average revenue, that's $865,000. Which is astronomical. And the median revenue is $34,000, which is also really high. That means out of all of the turn-based deck builder games, you have a 50-50 shot of making over $34,000. And then I started looking at these same stats just for the past year, and those numbers went down tremendously. So the average revenue for the past 12 months was $385,000, and the average median revenue was $9,200. Actually, when I'm editing this video, I'll probably just stick with the data that I got for the past 12 months because that's most pertinent to what I'm doing. We don't really care about overall, probably. So the games that are in the 90th percentile of revenue within the past 12 months are making about $248,000. So if I can beat out 90% of the other games that come out within the past year, I'd be making $250K. And if I go to the 80th percentile, that's $106,000. Okay, so the next game that I want to look at the viability for is my first-person bow puzzle game. And after looking around at the different games and genres and tags, I decided to base my analysis off of the tags puzzle platformer, first-person, and 3D. And so with the combination of those three tags, I felt like I was getting a list of competitive games that matched the type of game that I was trying to make. So if we look at that data, I'll show you in total, there are 553 games in this genre. And in the past 12 months, that's 112 new games. So just for reference, that's twice as many as the amount of games that were released as turn-based deck builders in the last year. The number of games that are being released monthly are 3 to 5 times larger than the turn-based deck builder genre. So again, because the turn-based deck builder genre went first, we're kind of comparing everything based off of that. So that was 3 to 5 new games per month, and the puzzle platformer first-person 3D games, there's 5 to 15 per month. In the past year, only 9 of those games made more than $20,000, as opposed to, for the turn-based deck builder game, the amount of games that have made over $20,000 in the past year is 26 out of the 59. So basically half of the games released made more than $20,000. And then the average revenue for the past 12 months is $31,000, and the median revenue for the past 12 months is $405. So you can see drastically less than the turn-based deck builder game. And the 90th percentile revenue is about $7,800. And the 80th percentile revenue is about $2,700. So if I get to be in the top 90% of first-person 3D platformer games, I would make about $8,000. Okay, so finally we come to the micro real-time strategy game that I'm developing. And this one was really difficult to figure out which tags I wanted to look at, because I could do something really broad or I can take something really narrow, and it's hard for me to peg exactly what I want that to look like. 2 games that I was looking at closely to see how they tagged their game were Bad North and Thronefall. And there's a lot of different tags that you could use for this kind of genre. You have real-time tactics, action roguelike, RTS, war, auto battler, strategy, tactical, action RTS, base building. As you can see, it's not easy to narrow down exactly what you should use when you're doing a competitive analysis. So I decided to land on minimalist and strategy because using that filter generated a list of games that I feel like that game most closely aligned to. aligned with too. So let's take a look at the stats for the minimalist strategy game. So the total number of games in this genre that fall into the category of tags minimalist and strategy are 2,098. The number that were released in the last 12 months is 362. The number of games that were released in the past year that made over $20,000 is 26. And the quantity of games that are being released monthly is between 20 and 30 games every month. That's basically one game a day. In the past year, the average revenue for a game like this is $29,000. And the median revenue for a game like this is $220. For the past year, the 90th percentile revenue is $5,600 and the 80th percentile is $1,700. So as you can see, as we're progressing through all of these different genres and tags, things are looking worse and worse. So if I'm looking just at the data, it makes sense to go with the turn-based deck building game, right? Now I think that should factor into my decision, but I don't think that it should be the sole deciding factor. One, because I don't know if I am asking the correct questions and organizing this data correctly. So I could be making some errors in my competitive analysis. Two, I have a really strong intuition about which of these three prototypes that I've made is going to perform the best. And that's because of the feedback that I've gotten from you guys on my comments and play tests in the past. So it is kind of funny. I was not expecting this to be the case, but looking at my intuition and personal experience is directly the opposite of what the market research shows. If I'm going purely off of the data, I should be making the turn-based deck building game. If I'm going off of the word of mouth and feedback that I heard from you all, I should be going after the micro RTS. But maybe that's not your opinion, or maybe this video will change your opinion. I don't know. I'm going to throw a poll down in the comments below, and you can go vote for the game that you think that I should make. Now, I will add another piece of interesting information. When I was looking at the games that came up for the turn-based deck building, all of those games were super well made and very well polished. They had gorgeous art, they had teams of people working on them. There were no low quality games, and so I think that's a big factor to keep in mind. And then again, a lot of this is speculative and subjective. I'm just trying to figure out how to minimize the risk of which game I should be putting my effort into. But one cool thing that's come from this is that I'm taking a look at a lot of different games and I'm starting to get a better sense of how much money a game has made or why it succeeded or why it didn't, just based off of looking at the screenshots and the description. So I'm kind of getting a sixth sense for which kinds of games are successful and why. So if you have any tips or advice for how I can fix or improve my approach for my market research, I'm all ears. Otherwise, I would love if you would go down to the description or the comments, and I'm going to link a poll for which prototype you think I should continue developing. I have a pretty strong idea which one you guys are going to pick, but it'll be interesting to see the numbers nonetheless, so go down and vote. And if you haven't seen any of the videos, I'll post them as well so you can see what the prototypes are all about and how they're different. Regardless of which game I continue developing, I should have a Steam page up for it soon, and I plan on regularly updating a demo so that you guys can keep playtesting as I develop it. I think that'll be a lot of fun and give us a lot of back and forth for how I can improve the game. And I think that's it. I appreciate all of your input, and I hope that you will continue giving me feedback on this development process because I want to make the game that people want to play. So let's do it. Thanks for sticking around. Subscribe if you haven't. Liked this video if you actually liked it, and I'll see you in the next one.